Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
It's good to see you. And I know, I understand your meeting before ended a little bit early, so I know some folks left.
Yeah.
And I appreciate and I'm a few minutes late, so I appreciate you sticking around. But I had wanted to come up and just have a chance to, I always said I wanted to come out as much as possible and just talk openly about what we're facing, and give everybody a chance to ask me questions. And so I wanted to stay true to that. I'm doing town halls, big formal town halls once a month, but I also think it's good to have smaller conversations like this. So I'll just talk for a little bit about the budget, about what we're facing, what we got to do, and then I'd love to just have a conversation and answer any questions that you have. So the city of Hartford is, I've been describing it now as a Category 5 budget hurricane. I mean, this is not a little storm. This is not the usual problem. And I know one of the challenges here is that people have been hearing that the city of Hartford is in crisis or has budget challenges for so long. Every single year it feels like there's a deficit, and there've got to be cuts made or other things done to solve it. And that's true. One of the reasons that the problem is so big right now is that it was never really solved all along the way. Just every single year there were little things done to try to piece it together with some tape and some string and baling wire and hold it together for a year. So the city did things like selling its parking garages, or taking money that was set aside for long-term employee benefits and taking that money. Things that you can only do once. Once you sell that garage, you don't get to sell it again. And so we never solved the bigger problems that are underneath it. What are some of those problems? So all along the way, even though there were big challenges, the city kept borrowing money. Borrowed a lot of money. And then to make it easier, they refinanced the debt, just like you could refinance a mortgage on your house. But they did it a couple of times, and they kept pushing the payments out further into the future. And the problem is, we're now in the future. And all those debts, all that payment that was pushed forward, we're starting to hit it right now. So over the next few years, the payments we have to make, again, just like mortgage payments, they go up like a rocket over the next few years. There's other problems. The amount we have to pay into the pension fund has gone from about $10 million in 2010 to over $40 million a year this year and next. And it's growing bigger. So there are all these things that we have an obligation to pay. We're required by law to pay. The only way you can not pay those things is bankruptcy, and that's not something anybody wants. So we've got to figure out other ways to get our house in order. And the truth is there's not a whole lot that we do control. Because if you take out the payments on your debt, and you take out the pension payments, and you take out the health care, you're left with only a small slice of the pie. And if you also take out education, which is another $90 million, you're left with an even smaller piece of the pie. So we've got to figure out, with that small piece of the pie, how to save as much as we can save. And I'll say it as honestly as I can, there's no way to do it that's not really, really painful. Everything we have to do is going to be difficult and painful. We don't get to choose between the painful option and the easy option. It's between the painful option and the unthinkable option. And so there's going to be things, I don't think there's any way we do this without there being layoffs. I don't think there's any way we do it without taking a look at whether there are even services, as a whole, services that we just can't deliver as a city. We've got to do all that. And I think at the same time that we're doing that, I say this as a Democrat who's a supporter of labor and of organized labor, but we've got to ask our unions to come to the table and get a whole different deal. We just can't afford the type of contracts that we've had in the past. And what I'm about to say, I don't say to criticize employees or criticize city employees, but I just want to give you an example of the kinds of issues we've got. I was in the Hartford Current today that the fire chief, the past fire chief, who just left, and I brought on a new fire chief. When he left, because of the contract that he had for many, many years, He got more than $180,000 paid out in sick time and vacation time. That's not even, I'm not even talking about his pension. I'm just talking about the one-time payout.
Yeah.
Now maybe that's something a Fortune, 50 company can pay, but that's not something the city of Hartford can pay.
That's right.
We've got employees, again, good employees who worked hard. That's not the point. Employees who are retiring with pensions that are twice what they made on their base salary. We've got health care and other obligations that go beyond when someone retires for years and years. And it's not about what's fair. It's not about whether they earned it. It's just about the fact that we don't have the money. So we've got to figure out how to make some big changes in our contracts going forward, and making sure that we're striking a different kind of deal, one that we can actually make good on. So when we make a promise, we're making a promise not just so that life is easier right now, but so that everybody in Hartford 5 years or 10 years from now can actually pay the bill. So that's what we're doing right now. I've proposed a piece of legislation that I think will give us some tools that we need to help do this a little bit easier, a little bit better. It's called, what I proposed sets up a commission called the Financial Stability Commission, Financial Sustainability Commission. That commission, there are a couple of important things. But one thing to get straight from the start, it doesn't in any way reduce the powers of the city council or reduce the power and authority of me as mayor or the city treasurer or anyone else. But it does give us some new tools. And here's an example. Right now, when we're negotiating contracts with unions, if we can't agree, and we reach, it's called an impasse, you can't agree, right now it goes to an arbitration panel. And the truth is, most of the time, the arbitration panel sides with labor. And again, I'm not saying that's bad or good, except that if they side with labor when we put on the table the best offer we can make, we're just deepening the crisis because we can't afford to pay. So this commission would take the place of those arbitration panels. Or it's still negotiating with unions, we still have the collective bargaining process, but if we can't reach an agreement, the referee becomes a commission that exists to protect the financial health of this city. That's its mission, to make sure that this city can survive. And that's who I think needs to be the referee when we're in a time of crisis like this. That's one thing. The other thing is, the way the negotiations work, a lot of these contract negotiations started under the last administration. And the last administration put a lot of offers on the table. And a lot of those offers we can't afford. So even if they went to arbitration and the arbitration panel decided in the city's favor, we would lose by winning. In other words, even if they decided in our favor, we still couldn't afford, because what the last administration put on the table was more than we could pay. So those are some of the things that what I'm proposing would deal with, but it would do some other things. It would also allow us, mayor and city council together, to make a decision about how much can we afford to pay into the pension fund. I'm not talking about whether we pay people's pensions. We got to pay people's pensions. I'm not talking about whether we pay even the new obligation that built up over this particular year. I'm saying, can we really afford as a city to make catch-up payments of more than $25 million to get the pension fund up to 100% funded, which very few cities have? In our situation, with our crisis, I don't think we have the luxury of doing that. But the charter of the city requires us to do it if the Pension Commission recommends it. So that's another reason we need a change in the state law. So those are some examples. But along with that, I'm going to be going out to our big tax exempt properties, our big tax exempt institutions, universities, hospitals, and saying, we know you provide important services. We know that you employ a lot of people. We know you're a really important part of this community. But we need your help. You don't pay any taxes to the city of Hartford. We do provide services, and we need help. And we're going to have a similar conversation with some of our biggest companies. They pay a lot of taxes already. They pay more taxes here than they would pay anywhere else. But we're still going to have to go to them and ask them for some help. And I think the only way we can get that help, the only way we can look them in the face and ask for that help, is if we're doing everything we possibly can to get our own house in order and to make sure that we're driving as much of the cost of government down as possible. So that's what we're going to try to do. But I'm not going to, sorry about that, I'm not going to tell you that any of this is going to be easy. Even if we got that state law, we'd still have to make a lot of cuts. And even if we make a lot of cuts, it's still not going to get us all the way there. The last piece of this, what we've got to do, and this is bigger than me or the city council, it's bigger than the city of Hartford. This is about the state and even about the country. We need to change the way the state of Connecticut thinks about cities. You know, we're a city with big city challenges. We're a city that's got neighborhoods that are among the poorest in the country. We deliver services that serve the whole state, whether it's our hospitals or our universities or the state property that's here. So many of our neighbors in our city, in our state, who are struggling with homelessness or addiction or out of prison, they come to Hartford, and we serve them as we should, because it's the right thing to do. But it's not right that we bear that responsibility on our own. So as we're facing this crisis, I'm going to do everything I can to try to change the way people think about our cities. Change the way they think about who bears the responsibility to make cities work. We can do it. We're going to do everything we can here. We're going to take responsibility to make the changes that are needed. But we need help. And I'm going to do everything I can to try to persuade our towns surrounding us and the state and everybody else that we need some help. But that's going to be hard, and it's going to be especially hard because the state of Connecticut is in its own crisis right now, and they don't have a lot of money sitting around. They don't have any money sitting around. So I'm going to stop there and let you ask any questions you want.
I have a question.
But let me give me 1 second. but that's the best kind of plainest explanation I can give for where we are and why we've got to consider doing some of the things I think we need to do. All right, thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, why did we build a ballpark?
You're asking the wrong guy.
Why?
Only in his turn.
I wouldn't have built it. I don't think it was. I don't think it was. Look, I've got 3 little kids. I'm looking forward to taking them to games, but that's not the question. The question is, can a city in our financial position spend $70 million to build a baseball stadium? And when you think about what that money could have done to revitalize Albany Avenue, or to revitalize Main Street, or to revitalize Franklin, or to revitalize any of our main avenues and corridors, that could go so far. But that decision was made a long time ago. And you know, when I came into office, I think you know, we found out that the project was way over budget and was way behind schedule. And the last thing I wanted to do, and I think the last thing anybody wanted to do, was put any more money into it. But you can't leave a half-built stadium sitting there, because it'll be sitting there for the next generation. So we had to do what we had to do, and what we did was get all of the stakeholders to the table. Got the team to put some money in, we got the developer to put some money in, and we had to put some money in. We ended up paying a lot less than I thought we were going to have to pay, because we just borrowed the extra money to make that payment, and we got it at a rate that is lower, and we're going to be making, you know, it's only going to end up costing us about $160,000 a year to close that gap. Now, again, that's money that could go somewhere else. I would rather have never spent it, but it's less than I thought we were going to have to spend. And when you think of the fact that there was more than $10 million gap, we ended up, I think, doing the best we could with a bad situation. But back to your question, I wouldn't have built it.
And many of us are concerned as elders, people in the city of Hartford. I own my home, it's paid for, you know, all those kinds of things. And I'm getting the evaluation there. Our taxes are going up in June from what I get for the assessment on my house. So I am a retired senior citizen, and I get frustrated with this kind of thing that's going on. A lot of us are losing our homes, sir, and because we cannot afford it.
I know. So the reason that's happened, so you know, a long time ago, let me see him step back further. every city or town in Connecticut, you've got a mill rate, right, which is the tax rate.
Right.
And then you got the assessment ratio. It means
Right.
what percentage of the value in your
Right.
house are you paying taxes on. For every town and city in the state, whether you're a business or you're a homeowner, you pay the same mill rate and you get assessed at the same amount. It's 70% of the value. In Hartford, a long time ago, to help out homeowners, it was split up so that businesses are paying their taxes on the full 70% and residents are paying just on 30%. So another way of saying that is, for homeowners in the city of Hartford, the amount of money you're paying is about equivalent to a 35 mil tax rate, which is about what's true in the surrounding towns. That's not to say it's not a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and
When you retire,
and when you retire, you're on a fixed income. And so, but what's happened is there was a law passed a couple of years ago to gradually, over 30 years, equalize that, so that Hartford, eventually you have the same things being paid, the same amount being paid as in other towns, or the same assessment. So over a 30-year period, it's supposed to close, and that's why your taxes went up, because the assessment went up, even though the mill rate stays the same. And you're right, the cost, it hurts. It's a 5% increase, in your right. Now, but let me say this. The one thing I think we absolutely cannot do is raise taxes on our small businesses, because one of the reasons we're in this problem, one of the reasons we're in this mess is that we've raised taxes as a city so high that for those businesses that are paying full freight, they're paying the full assessment ratio at the 74 and change mill rate, they can't afford to keep their doors open. And that's why when you go to those avenues I was just talking about, you see so many shops that have closed, so many empty properties that aren't worth developing. So we cannot solve this problem by trying to raise up taxes that are going to hit those guys.
And another question.
Well, we're going to jump around because this
All right.
ma'am, you had wanted to ask.
And I'm just saying, because the fact that once, like those small businesses move out and the homes are boarded up because people have left and walked away, your property value is steady going down.
Right.
So when you try to sell that house, you can't sell it for a little bit of nothing.
Right.
You're not getting back anything of what you put into it.
Yeah.
And it's not just Hartford.
No.
I live in Bloomfield, but it's not just Hartford. Time you turn around, the mill rate or whatever is going up.
Right.
And another thing is, like, there's a lot of, like at one time, they had that people that had certain type of jobs had to live in Hartford. If they don't live in Hartford, they're not paying Hartford taxes. They're living in the suburbs. And that money is staying in the suburbs, and they're getting money out of Hartford.
Look,
But it used to be that you had to live in Hartford.
It used to be, but it's not now.
there's a state law. There's a state law that
You're supposed to.
does not allow us to require somebody to live in Hartford.
I know, but used to.
But it used to be so. But under state law, we're not allowed to require somebody to
I
live in
know,
Hartford.
but it used to be.
But you're right. There's a lot of
Money that's
people
going
work for the
out.
city. A lot of people work for the city, don't live in Hartford.
Right.
And even more, a lot of retirees who are getting pensions
Big bucks.
don't live in the city. But that's all the more reason why ultimately the only way this really gets solved is by starting to act more like a region. Instead of cutting ourselves off or letting other towns cut themselves off, start acting like a region. If you look at any of the cities that have really revived themselves or that are really on the move right now, that are growing, none of them have boundaries that are drawn around 17 square miles. They all have a bigger footprint. They all broke down some of those barriers and started sharing costs and sharing revenues with the broader area. And we haven't done that here in Connecticut because we're kind of stuck in our New England ways. But ultimately, that might be the biggest obstacle to getting where we need to go. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
This new organization, like, how is it affecting education? I know there was at Buckley word about the, sometimes it's not to an advantage of children to be bussed out.
Right.
Farmington, Avon, You know, when I was growing up in New York City, I went to the local school.
Yeah.
And so how is this impacting education?
So, to the bill that we proposed, you mean, is that what you mean, the legislation that we're
Yes.
talking about, or just the crisis overall?
Right.
So, right now, we're required by the state to pay the same amount of money to the school system every year. It's about $90 million. We have to pay that. One of the reasons that there have been cuts made on the Board of Ed is that their costs keep going up. And one of the reasons that their costs keep going up is that there are raises built into the contracts. And so even if, you know, nothing else changes, the salaries go up, so it costs more money to run the schools, so you got to find some way of saving it, which sometimes means eliminating positions. That's on the Board of Education side. That's what the Board of Education is looking at doing. That's not because we've reduced the amount that we're giving to the Board of Ed, but because they're getting the same amount, but the costs are going up. But I do think, you know, we're going to have to talk about whether we can pay that full amount that we've been paying. The way the state law works right now, if we don't pay that full $90 million, then the state doesn't give us any support for the schools, and that, you know, that obviously we cannot live with. So one of the things that I'm trying to get to happen from the state is that even if we have to spend a little bit less because we're in crisis, they continue their full support for our school system. So that's one of the things that I hope the legislation would do if it passes. But, you know, I've also asked the superintendent to take a really hard look at where she can find savings that aren't going to affect the education of kids. You know, and so looking at central office and seeing if there are places to reduce costs. I think there will be some places to reduce costs, but it's not a ton of money that you save by doing that. Now, to your broader point about education in the community, I agree with you. Our neighborhood schools, I think, have really lost something as we've built so many magnet schools. You know, we've built way more schools than a city of our size needs. We have under enrollment at almost all of our neighborhood schools, at least all of our neighborhood schools in this area, and we've got to address that. You know, we can't run schools that are at 60% full. That's all part of a bigger conversation, which is what's the future education in Hartford, and can you keep having these two separate systems where you've got, you know, CREC magnets and Hartford public school magnets and neighborhood schools, and all three don't necessarily talk to each other, coordinate with each other, and it's part of this chef settlement more broadly, where we don't necessarily have the ability to predict how many kids are going to be enrolled in our schools in any given year. So it's very hard to plan. So those are some really big issues that, you know, that we're trying to talk through with the state and with the plaintiffs in the chef case.
Yeah.
But, you know, ultimately, I think we need to be refocused on our neighborhood schools.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I have to say something about the schools, because I, for 25 years, this busing program you're talking about, you know the reason why? Do you know the reason why? We had Project Concern because I was one with President Johnson, Lyndon B. James Johnson, the White House, spoke on that and said, our children in the neighborhoods, we are poor, but you give us a chance, we can have education as well as those in the suburbs.
That's right.
I worked in the suburbs for 25 years, Farmington, only black spot, okay? And Farmington school system. I was the first person there under Project Concern. This Chef versus O'Neill came in for integration. That will never happen, sir. That is not going to ever. And this is what they're trying to do when they build these magnet schools, trying to get the suburbans to come. It would never happen. It would never happen in the city of Hartford. I know that. I know it. I worked in the systems.
Well,
I know it. Okay?
You know, but
Avon, we were only people. I went, many of you may be Trudy Johnson. We went to all these suburban schools out in West Hartford. I'm going to tell you who Jordan, Avon, Simsbury. We didn't go across the river, okay? We had to stay in this area here with this Project Concern thing. Now, when Chef versus O'Neill came into place, what happened? They wanted to say we're not integrated enough, okay? So what they said, well, we'll make magnet school. Chef versus O'Neill was the start of the planning of these different schools coming together, magnet schools. That's how they got to keep them coming into Hartford. See, I know I worked on them.
Yeah.
They are not coming into Hartford schools. I'm gonna
They're
tell
not
you.
going to.
So that's the reason why your child is not getting the right education like it's supposed to be. It's because of that. And if you don't stay on top of it, you're not gonna get it.
But, you know, but so
I worked on them. I know it started them.
some of them are coming in. So I mean, there are a lot of schools
You
where
draw them on Washington Street
But-
at the, what's called school up here on Washington Street. What's the name of that?
They go to Capital Prep too, but
The prep, okay, the
They go
prep.
Capital Prep.
And now on Washington Street where you have all your.
The learning center.
The learning center, that one,
Those
okay?
ones, they'll go
I know
those
how it all began.
yeah.
but
It's there when it started, okay?
you know, one of the other things is that the region has changed so much that, I mean, this gets into some really tough questions, but the region has changed so much that it used to be that, you know, Bloomfield, if you got a kid from Bloomfield or Windsor, you were probably getting integration because there was probably a bigger chance that the kid there was white. It's not necessarily true anymore. And
That's true.
so one of the challenges is that the demographics of the region have changed profoundly.
Definitely.
But we're still operating
But
under
the north of
that's
Hartford
25 years
has
old.
never served, the
And-
north of Hartford has never had a chance.
And you know, and I think you know, you're absolutely right that there
I know.
are fewer magnet schools located here. But I would say some of the magnet schools did draw kids in. My concern is that we define success too narrowly under Chef. Chef is all about how many kids of one color are sitting next to how many kids of another
Yeah,
color,
yeah.
and not about whether we're doing everything
Quality
possible to
education.
get every kid, no matter where they live or what they look like,
Should get the
access
same
to an
kind.
opportunity to get a good education, hopefully at a place near where they live.
Live.
So, but you know,
I'm telling you, I used to live in Linden, New Jersey. Okay, when my son went to school, my school was right across the street from my house. They wanted to bus my child out to the Sunnyside section, okay, which is maybe a half an hour on a bus, and the bus stop is right in front of a candy store. And it was like 10 to 15 parents. We fought it, and it never happened. We fought it because in the first place, why do our kids have to be bussed out? Why can't some of your kids come in? And they weren't doing it. That was all white section,
Right.
most of it. And they would not come into our section, but they wanted to bus our kids out. Why should my child have to get up an hour and a half earlier to get ready to go on a bus at 6:30 in the morning? He's traveling and then don't get home until 6 o'clock at night. I fought it to no end. And it happened that the Board of Education president was a black woman that went to my church. And we got together and we got almost 50 to 60 parents. We petitioned and everything. It did not go through. Because it's not fair. If we're good enough to travel half an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour, they're good enough to come in. My thing is quality education no matter where you live. That's what it should be. You bring the right teachers in, and the kids can learn. But if you go in there with an attitude, oh, I gotta fight them before I can teach them, that's wrong.
right.
That
The other
is
thing-
wrong. Every child is not that
And
way.
it also comes back. Look, it also comes back to what I was saying about changing the way people think about
Yeah.
who bears what the responsibility of
And some of that is the
supporting our
parents.
cities. No, sometimes that, but it's also, look, we do need more support from the region for our schools, and
We
and
do.
it's not, we do get a lot of money, but the reason it's not enough is that there are a lot of kids in our neighborhood schools especially who have higher needs. You know, there's a higher percentage of kids who are special education needs. In a lot of our schools, there's a higher number of English language learners. And all of that takes more resources to do well. And we all have an obligation to serve those students. But it should be an obligation that's
For
shared
everybody,
broadly. So,
yes.
so any other, oh, yes, ma'am.
Well, you see, the reason they don't want their children bused in, I can understand it. Because my daughter went to school in Hartford. And I tried to stay with it. But when she got into Fox Middle, and Fox Middle hadn't been built that long, when she come out of Fox Middle, she thought she was going to Weaver, but my mind was made up before she come out of Weaver. I couldn't afford Hartford schools no more. I only had one. I couldn't afford to send her to private school, but I couldn't afford not to send her to private school. I was willing to go without anything, shoes, coats, anything. I sent my child to Northwest Catholic in West Hartford.
I understand that, but why couldn't you afford Hartford? You said you couldn't afford Hartford schools.
Because I went to the Hartford schools. I wasn't
I
one
did
of those
too.
absentee parents.
I wasn't there. I went to the Hartford
working,
schools.
but I was not an absentee
Me
parent.
neither.
You might look up anytime and I'm walking through the door.
That's right. But there's a lot of parents that not.
Because I had that right. Now, I talked to some of the teachers in Fox Middle and other schools in Hartford. You know what my conclusion was? I had a German Shepherd. And my conclusion when I walked out the door,
Take them with you.
they could not teach my German Shepherd, never mind my child. Okay?
I understand that.
So I can understand why a lot of people don't want their children to be bused in Hartford. They don't hire the teachers that they should for the Hartford school.
That's what I said, quality education.
Right.
No matter where you go, you should be able to
So I want
be taught.
yes, ma'am.
I taught in Hartford over 30 years, and all of this, evidently, it hadn't come into school. And as far as the teachers, I taught it, I was a teacher. And I don't know if I had any of your kids, but I have never heard of all this stuff. We teach what you send to us. And I can say, the people or the kids that I had, they were some of the best kids that I have ever met. Because they had good parents. Their parents didn't do all the, you can't do this and you can't learn it. Any kid can learn if somebody in school and somebody at home teaches.
And that's right.
I didn't have all of this. The kids and the teachers didn't do this, the teachers didn't do that. I taught over 30 years in Hartford School. I taught at Arsenal School and I taught at Simpson Waverly. They were some of the best kids that I have seen and I still see. In fact, the man who cooks here, he knew me.
Yeah.
And all of this about the kids didn't do and the teachers didn't do, it could be. I don't know where those kids came from, but I did not come in contact. And I was a certified teacher for over 30 years in the Hartford school system. And they were the best kids I ever saw.
Why don't we?
You can't classify everybody the same. That's not, you can't everybody the same basket.
In a few
What
minutes.
I'm hearing is like, the teacher this and the teacher, wasn't like that. Not where I went. I don't know what teachers you have reference to.
I think there are a lot of great teachers. There are a lot of great teachers in public schools.
Us. And most of those kids had good parents.
That's part of it.
Yes.
The parents and the teachers.
The ones that
together.
I had.
We talked a while about education. Education is hugely important. But in the on the budget side, and back to your question, ma'am, about what all this means. Most of the budget challenges we're facing aren't about the education side. That's not to say that there aren't challenges, but the city, we provide the amount that we required to provide, and we've got to manage the crisis outside of the school system. So, so I wanted to make sure, just get a chance, if there are any other questions about the other side, the city operations, just give a chance to answer any other questions. I know you guys have been here for a while, and I need to run back to a meeting in City Hall in a couple of minutes, but I'd be happy to answer any other questions about the budget. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the regional approach, and I was happy to hear you say that, and I was also happy to hear you say that Hartford is carrying a lot of the burden for the region.
Yeah.
How do we get everyone in Hartford, at least, on the same page in terms of pursuing a regional approach to get the region to take responsibility, perhaps to get the state of Connecticut to take responsibility for Hartford and the other cities? How do we get the community groups, the unions, and everybody to push for this regional approach?
The best thing I can say is just keep talking about it and keep pushing for it. And you know, sometimes it takes a crisis to cause change. And you know, both at the state and at the city, we're facing crises. And so maybe that'll, you know, make some people rethink the way we've been doing business.
Would that incorporate the towns would have to come in and talk, and Hartford would talk together about what they want to make a region or whatever?
There are a lot of
Like
different,
the towns
it's been done, regionalism can mean,
Yeah.
it can mean a lot of different things, and it's meant a lot of different things in a lot of different places, but we don't do much on a regional basis at all right now. So, I want to thank you so much for sticking around, for taking the time. I appreciate it. And like I said, I wish I was coming with a better message to deliver, but the only thing I can say is I promise to always deliver the real message, and I will do my best, my very best to get through this with as little damage as we possibly can, and get to the city to a place where we can start growing again. But it's going to be a long and painful process, and I don't want you to think otherwise.
No.
Thank you so
It
much.
won't be like Detroit. Please.
You know, that's why we have to address our big problems now. Because if you keep pushing them off, then that's what you're
It'll
going to
never be addressed.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.